March 1951. The HMCS Cayuga, a Royal Canadian Navy destroyer, is sailing off the coast of Korea when wounded South Korean soldiers are brought aboard. Some of them need surgery immediately. The ship's surgeon, a quiet, confident man named Dr. Joseph Sear, has never operated under combat conditions, but he shows no hesitation. He scrubs in, reviews the procedures one final time in his cabin, and operates on 16 men. Every single one of them survives. The crew celebrates their doctor's skill. The Canadian press writes admiring stories. Dr. Sear becomes a minor wartime hero. There's only one problem. Joseph Sear isn't Joseph Sear. He's Ferdinand Waldo Demara Jr., a high school dropout from Massachusetts who has never attended medical school, never held a scalpel professionally, and learned everything he knows about surgery from textbooks he speed-read the night before each operation. He has stolen the real Dr. Sear's credentials, forged his way onto a wartime vessel, and just performed 16 successful field surgeries based entirely on his ability to mirror what a surgeon would do: the walk, the talk, the unshakable confidence, the technical vocabulary deployed at exactly the right moments. He doesn't know medicine, he knows surgeons. And he knows that if you can become a perfect reflection of what people expect to see, they'll hand you the scalpel themselves. This is a script about mirroring, not the kind your therapist uses to build rapport, not the unconscious mimicry that happens when you're falling for someone or talking to a close friend. This is about something darker, the deliberate weaponization of your own identity against you. The way certain people don't just copy your mannerisms to make you comfortable, they become you. Or rather, they become the version of you that you most want to see in someone else. A soulmate, a loyal partner, a trusted mentor, a friend who finally gets it. And once you're looking at that perfect reflection, that's when the trap closes. What you're about to hear isn't self-help. It's not a list of red flags or toxic traits. This is a documented phenomenon with roots in neuroscience, psychoanalytic theory, cult research, and a trail of historical case studies that read like psychological horror. We're going to trace how mirroring works at the neural level, how it gets weaponized in everything from war propaganda to intimate relationships to business partnerships, and, most importantly, what happens when you spend so long performing a reflection that you forget who you were before the mirror. This took weeks to research. The sources you're about to hear aren't decoration. They're here because this topic doesn't survive shallow treatment. Let's start with the science. 1999. Duke University. Two psychologists, Tanya Chartrand and John Barge, set up an experiment so simple it almost sounds pointless. They bring participants into a room and pair each one with what they're told is another participant. In reality, that participant is a confederate working for the researchers. The task is just to have a conversation, describe some photographs, talk about your opinions, nothing complicated. But behind the scenes, the confederate has been instructed to either mirror the participant's body language, subtly matching their posture, gestures, facial expressions, or to deliberately stay neutral. Afterward, participants rate how much they liked their conversation partner. The results aren't subtle. People who were mirrored, who spent 10 minutes talking to someone who unconsciously seemed to move like them, reported significantly higher liking and described the interaction as smoother, more comfortable, more natural. They had no awareness anything unusual had happened. They just felt good, connected, understood. Chartrand and Barge called this the chameleon effect, the automatic mimicry that happens between people in social situations. And here's the critical part. It's bi-directional. Not only do we unconsciously mimic people we like people more when they mimic us. Your brain is wired to treat mimicry as a signal of safety, kinship, and trustworthiness. When someone moves like you, talks like you, mirrors your energy, your nervous system reads that as proof that this person is on your wavelength, that you're not alone. And that feeling of recognition is one of the deepest hungers a human being carries. CarlJung, the Swiss psychiatrist who broke from Freud and spent his career mapping the unconscious, had a concept he called the shadow. Not the watered-down Jungian shadow you see in pop psychology, something more specific. The shadow, for Jung, was everything about yourself that you've disowned, the parts of your personality you've pushed down because they don't fit the story you tell about who you are. Your anger, if you've decided you're a peaceful person, your ambition, if you've built an identity around being humble, your vulnerability, if you've convinced yourself you're strong. Jung's insight, and this is what makes the shadow so relevant to manipulation, is that we don't just hide these parts. We're drawn to people who seem to embody them. And when someone shows up who reflects back the version of yourself you show the world and the version you've buried, who appears to recognize all of you, it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like destiny. That's the first layer of dark mirroring. It's not just copying your mannerisms. It's about appearing to recognize you, seeing past your performance, reflecting back the parts of yourself you thought no one could see. And if someone can do that deliberately, if they can map both your persona and your shadow, then reflect both back with precision, they don't just earn your trust, they earn something deeper. They earn your belief that they understand you in a way no one else ever has. That belief is the thing they spend. Let's go back to Damara. By the time he operated on those soldiers in 1951, he had already lived several other lives. Trappist monk, college dean of philosophy, prison administrator, cancer researcher, teacher, soldier. He moved through identities the way most people move through jobs, and what made him so unnervingly good at it wasn't just his intelligence, though his IQ was reportedly extraordinary, and his memory was very nearly photographic. It was his ability to listen. Here's how Damara worked. When he decided to become someone, a surgeon, a professor, a warden, he didn't just forge credentials and memorize jargon. He found a real person who already had that identity, someone respected, and he studied them. Not their resume, them, how they carried themselves, what they valued, what insecurities they hid, what language they used when they wanted to signal expertise, and what language they used when they wanted to signal humility. He'd befriend them, learn everything, then he'd assume their identity and disappear into their life. What Damara understood, and this is what separates dark mirroring from ordinary con artistry, is that people don't just want flattery, they want to be recognized. They want someone to see the story they're telling themselves about who they are and validate it. So Damara didn't pretend to be smarter than the people he imitated. He pretended to value what they valued. If he was becoming a doctor, he didn't just learn medical terminology. He learned what that doctor believed being a doctor meant: service, precision, the quiet dignity of doing your work well. Whatever story that person told themselves to justify the weight of the job, Damara absorbed it and reflected it back. That's the architecture. You don't mirror behavior, you mirror identity. You become living proof that someone's self-concept is real, valid, and shared. And the person looking at that reflection rarely thinks to check whether the mirror is lying. 1961. An American psychiatrist named Robert J. Lifton publishes Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, based on years of interviewing American prisoners of war who'd been subjected to Chinese coercive persuasion programs during the Korean War. Lifton wasn't interested in propaganda or physical torture. He was trying to understand the psychological techniques that could make a fully formed adult, a soldier, an officer, abandon their identity and adopt a new one. How do you break someone's sense of self and rebuild it in your image? One of the techniques he documented was what he called the cult of confession. Prisoners would be encouraged, sometimes gently, to confess their doubts, their fears, their private shames. And the interrogator would mirror those confessions back. They'd say, "I struggled with that too. I had those same doubts. I understand exactly what you mean." It manufactured intimacy, trust on both sides. The prisoner began to feel that the interrogator wasn't an enemy. He was someone who understood, someone who'd walked the same road. And once that bond formed, the reshaping of belief became possible, not as coercion, as guidance, as the wisdom of a trusted friend. Lifton's research was about state-sponsored thought reform, but the same techniques surface, almost identically, in cult recruitment, in high-control religious groups, in manipulative mentorships, in romantic relationships built on calculated love bombing, and in the playbooks of charismatic leaders throughout history. Jim Jones, the man who eventually led 909 people to their deaths in Jonestown, didn't preach one message to everyone. He had different versions of himself for different audiences. To politically active members, he was a revolutionary. To religious members, a prophet. To vulnerable members, a father figure. He mirrored their needs, their language, their fears, and became the exact reflection of what each person was searching for. When people are looking at a reflection of their deepest need, they stop asking whether the mirror is lying. There's a reason mirroring works at such a deep level, and it's not just psychological, it's neurological. When someone mimics your gestures, your speech patterns, your facial expressions, something happens in your brain you have almost no conscious control over. Imaging studies show increased activation in regions associated with reward processing, the same circuits that light up when you eat something you love, or win, or experience pleasure. Being mirrored feels good, not vaguely, in a neurochemical, dopamine-releasing way. And research building on the chameleon effect has shown that mimicry doesn't just make us like someone more, it makes us trust them more. It lowers our defenses. We become more willing to comply with requests, more open to persuasion, less likely to question motives. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. For most of human history, the people who moved like you, talked like you, shared your rhythms, those were your tribe. Mimicry was a reliable signal of same group, safe person. But evolution didn't prepare us for strategic mimicry. For someone who studies your patterns, not because they share them, but because they want something from you. Loyalty, a signature, a piece of your life. Your brain still responds the way it did on the savannah. The manipulator counts on it. Here's what most discussions of manipulation miss. Dark mirroring doesn't just use the target, it consumes the person performing it. Go back to Damara. After the HMCS Cayuga, after his surgical success made headlines, the real Dr. Joseph Sear saw his own name in the newspaper attached to operations he'd never performed. Damara was exposed. The Canadian Navy quietly released him without charges. The embarrassment of admitting they'd been fooled was greater than their appetite for justice. But he kept doing it. Different identities, different lives, different performances. And in interviews late in his life, when he was finally just himself, Fred Damara, no credentials, no stolen identity, he admitted something quietly devastating. He couldn't quite remember who he was supposed to be when there was no role to play. The performance had replaced the person. The French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan wrote about something he called the mirror stage, the moment in early childhood when an infant first sees its reflection and begins to form a sense of self. Lacan saw this as both the birth of identity and the birth of alienation, because the self in the mirror is always external, always an image, always a performance of being someone. What Lacan didn't fully describe, but Damara's life illustrates, is what happens when someone spends their entire existence inside the mirror stage, always performing, always reflecting, never anchored to anything internal. You don't just lose yourself, you become nothing, a series of surfaces with no center. That's the first cost of dark mirroring. The manipulator isn't winning, they're hollowing themselves out, one performance at a time, until there's no person left under the masks. But there's a second cost, and it's the one nobody talks about, the one that lands on the targets. Dr. Martha Stout, in her 2005 book, The Sociopath Next Door, documents case after case of people who've been targeted by what she calls strategic mirroring. These aren't strangers. They show up in every part of life. The romantic partner who, in the first month, seemed to share every value, every dream, every wound, who finished your sentences, who made you feel for the first time that you'd been understood, and then, somewhere around the time they got what they came for, became a stranger, cold, distant, or simply gone. The mentor who took an interest in your career, who saw your potential when no one else did, who spoke your language about ambition and craft, and quietly positioned himself for years to take credit for what you built. The business partner whose vision matched yours so perfectly it felt like fate until the accounts didn't add up. The friend who knew you better than your own family, who you would have trusted with anything until you saw him mirroring someone else with the same intensity and realized the version of you too he reflected back was never real. It was a costume. Stout's research shows that targets of strategic mirroring don't just experience betrayal, they experience identity collapse. Because if the person who seemed to see you most clearly was performing the whole time, what does that say about your ability to read another human being? If you were fooled that completely by someone that close, how can you trust your own judgment about anyone going forward? And here's where we have to be honest about the failure mode of this entire conversation. Because the natural response after hearing all this is hypervigilance, suspicion, the instinct to start auditing every relationship for signs of manipulation, to recoil from anyone who seems to get you too quickly, to wall yourself off from connection, because connection itself starts to feel like a setup. And that is how the fear of dark mirroring becomes its own prison. If you become so defended against being mirrored that you reject all forms of resonance, all forms of genuine recognition, you don't protect yourself. You isolate yourself. You end up doing to your own life what the manipulator would have done, cutting yourself off from real human connection. The difficult truth is that healthy relationships require mirroring. Empathy is a form of mirroring. A good partner adjusts to who you actually are. A trusted friend picks up your rhythms. A mentor worth anything reads your signals and adapts. The difference between healthy mirroring and dark mirroring isn't the presence of the behavior. It's two things underneath it. The first is mutuality. Real mirroring goes in both directions. Both people are adjusting. Both are revealing themselves. Both remain themselves while making space for the other. Both can break the mirroring, disagree, push back, exist independently without the relationship collapsing. Dark mirroring is one way. One person performs, the other is studied. The performer never quite shows up as a person, only as a reflection. And the moment you push back against the script, the reflection wavers. They go cold. They punish. They recast you as the problem, because there was no real person underneath to absorb the disagreement. The second is time. Strategic mirroring is almost always too fast, because the manipulator is working from a script, not building a real relationship. They need to establish loyalty quickly so they can leverage it before you notice the inconsistencies. They'll tell you they've never met anyone like you in the first conversation. They'll mirror every value, agree with every conviction, but if you watch carefully, they never add anything, never challenge you, never bring a perspective you hadn't considered, never exist independently of your expectations. They're a perfect mirror, and perfect mirrors don't exist in nature. Real human connection is imperfect. Real love, real friendship, real respect, they involve difference. Someone who truly sees you doesn't just reflect you, they refract you. They show you yourself from an angle you didn't have. They bring their own history, their own scars, their own blind spots. They disagree sometimes. They misunderstand sometimes. They have needs that don't align with yours. And paradoxically, that's how you know it's real. Robert Cialdini, one of the most cited researchers on influence and persuasion, has spent decades studying what makes people say yes. His work on reciprocity, scarcity, authority, these are the building blocks of legitimate persuasion and manipulative control. But buried in his research is something simpler. He calls it the click-whir response, the automatic reaction triggered when certain cues are activated. Someone mirrors us, click, we trust them. Someone signals authority, whir, we comply. The problem is that these responses are unconscious. You can know intellectually that mimicry can be strategic, that flattery can be calculated, and you'll still feel the pull. Your brain still releases the dopamine. You still want to trust the person who seems to see you. So the recognition test isn't a checklist. It's a single question, applied over time. Can this person exist when I disagree with them? A real partner disagrees with you sometimes. A real mentor pushes back. A real friend says, I don't think you're right about this. A real business partner has a contrary opinion now and then. It might be uncomfortable, but the relationship absorbs it and continues. The dark mirror can't absorb disagreement. The reflection wavers. The warmth disappears. You become an enemy the moment you stop reflecting them back. If you want one diagnostic that holds up across partners, mentors, friends, business relationships, that's it. Not how they treat you when you agree, how they treat you when you don't. In June 1982, Ferdinand Demara died of heart failure in a hospital in Anaheim, California. He was 60 years old. The obituaries struggled with what to call him: the great imposter, master of disguise, con man extraordinaire. But here's what nobody wrote. By the end, he wasn't pretending to be anyone. He was just Fred Demara, and apparently, that was the one identity he never quite figured out how to perform. The mirror only has power when you forget you're more than your reflection. When you forget that being seen and being known aren't the same thing. When you forget that the deepest human connection isn't finding someone who reflects you perfectly, it's finding someone who can witness you, disagree with you, challenge you, and still choose to stay. The question isn't whether someone is mirroring you. The question is whether you know who's looking back when they do.